The atmosphere in the Qatari capital was tense and electric as leaders from across the Arab and Islamic world gathered in an emergency summit. The reason was clear: an unprecedented Israeli strike on Doha itself, a city long known for hosting negotiations and political dialogue, had shaken the region to its core. From the opening remarks, the tone was one of outrage and urgency. The Qatari leadership presiding over the summit laid out the facts with deliberate clarity. My country's capital, Doha, where this summit is being held, has been subjected to a treacherous attack targeting one of the residences housing families of Hamas political leadership and its negotiating delegation in a residential neighborhood that includes schools and diplomatic missions. The words carried weight. For decades, Qatar has positioned itself as a mediator, offering its capital as neutral ground for peace talks. But now, that same capital had become a target. The speaker paused only briefly before posing a series of questions that cut straight to the contradictions in Israel's actions. If Israel wants to assassinate Hamas political leadership, why is it negotiating with them? And if it wants to negotiate for the release of hostages, why is it assassinating everyone with whom it could negotiate? And how are we supposed to receive in our country Israeli delegations for negotiations while those who sent these delegations are planning to bomb this country? The hall fell into silence. These were not questions awaiting diplomatic replies. They were rhetorical daggers intended to expose what Qatar saw as hypocrisy at the core of Israel's policy. The official made it clear such questions were not posed for answers. Instead, they served as proof of Israel's duplicity. These questions don't expect answers, but rather explain why we say openly that this aggression is truly vile, treacherous, and cowardly. For many in the summit, those words summed up the fury and frustration coursing through the region. The denunciation grew sharper. Qatar framed the attack not merely as a military maneuver, but as a betrayal of diplomacy itself, an act of malice designed to sabotage any path toward negotiation. And it's impossible to deal with this level of malice and betrayal. The condemnation drew nods from across the hall, with leaders and ministers visibly unsettled by the scale and symbolism of the strike. Then came a challenge to Israel's narrative, the story it tells the world about being a democracy under threat. Israel claims to be a democracy surrounded by enemies, while in reality it is building an occupation and an apartheid system hostile to its surroundings and waging a war of extermination during which it has committed crimes that know no red lines. Those words reverberated beyond the summit chamber, echoing long-standing Arab and Islamic grievances. What Israel calls security, others describe as systemic repression. What Israel calls defense, others view as war crimes. The Qatari remarks then turned personal, taking direct aim at recent statements by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The criticism was sharp and pointed. Its Prime Minister announced days ago that he has prevented the establishment of a Palestinian state and that such a state will never exist in the future. The hall responded with murmurs. The statement, quoted directly, underscored how Netanyahu himself had closed the door on any two-state solution, a solution that has been the backbone of international diplomacy for decades. And then a reminder of Israel's hostility even toward the Palestinian Authority, the very body created under agreements meant to foster peace. He is hostile to the Palestinian Authority and opposes the agreements under which this authority was established. The message was unmistakable. Israel, in Qatar's view, was not only striking Hamas, but undermining every possible Palestinian political entity, effectively ensuring that no partner for peace could ever exist. But the significance of this summit lay not only in the condemnations themselves, but in where they were spoken. This was Doha. This was Qatar, the country that for years had opened its doors for dialogue when others closed theirs. The attack was therefore not just about Hamas leaders. It was, in the eyes of many, a direct challenge to Qatar's sovereignty and its role as mediator. If Israel could strike in Doha, then no country hosting negotiations was safe. For Gulf leaders present at the summit, the implications were deeply unsettling. Many of them, quietly maintaining ties with Israel or balancing relationships with Washington, suddenly faced a chilling calculation. Could their capitals also become targets if they allowed their soil to serve as neutral ground? Diplomatic observers point to this as a dangerous turning point. If negotiations themselves are turned into targets, then the very idea of mediation collapses. Israel's strike was seen as more than an assault on Hamas, it was an assault on diplomacy. At the summit, officials warned that this risk would push the region into even deeper instability. Some framed it as a deliberate attempt to sabotage the possibility of peace altogether, replacing dialogue with domination. Beyond the political theatre, however, there was the human reality. The strike had hit a residential neighbourhood, a place where families lived, where children went to school, where embassies carried out their work. Images broadcast on Arab media showed shattered windows of classrooms, dust-covered families fleeing the area, and emergency crews rushing through the rubble. These images, projected onto screens inside the summit, underscored the accusation that Israel had crossed all red lines. The summit narrative was blunt. This was not a surgical strike. This was indiscriminate intimidation. In the hall, the underlying theme became clear: unity. For decades, Arab and Islamic nations have struggled to maintain a consistent position on Palestine. Political rivalries, economic interests, and shifting alliances have often fractured their responses. But now, with Doha under attack, the message was stark. An assault on Qatar was an assault on all. The rhetoric leaned heavily on collective dignity. Leaders portrayed the aggression as a challenge not only to Palestine or Hamas, but to the sovereignty of every state in the Arab and Islamic world. If Israel could strike here, in Qatar's capital, then no capital was beyond reach. As the proceedings drew toward their close, the calls for response grew louder. While no specific measures were announced, leaders hinted at avenues ranging from diplomatic escalation at the United Nations to coordinated economic pressure to security partnerships aimed at deterring future strikes. The Qatari narrative was successful in framing the event. This was not a localized military action, but an international violation demanding a united answer. The final note of the summit was one of defiance. The Qatari leadership closed with a statement that sought to expose the futility of Israel's approach, an approach that mixes negotiations with assassinations, peace talks with bombings. The argument was straightforward. If Israel targets the very capitals that host negotiations, it undermines the possibility of talks themselves. It cannot claim to pursue peace while simultaneously destroying the avenues through which peace might be achieved. The voiceover concluded with the sense that a red line had been crossed. Israel's strike on Doha was not just another military incident. It was a turning point, a challenge to sovereignty, diplomacy, and international norms.